Do you know what it feels like to be treated like a criminal in your own home? To hear your neighbors whispering, pointing, and believing a story that you know deep down is a lie. But it's spreading so fast you can't stop it. That was me 8 days after inheriting my mother's house. And the woman who turned my life into a circus was someone I barely knew, the HOA president, Elizabeth Jones. It started with the sound of my own voice bouncing in my head, ragged, breathless, as I struggled to climb through my bedroom window like some out-of-shape burglar. The metal frame screeched against my belt buckle. My boots slipped on the siding. My grocery bag swung wildly, one already tearing open. By the time I tumbled inside, I felt less like a homeowner and more like the punchline in a bad slapstick routine. Cans rolled across the floor, soda fizzed and sprayed, and my loaf of bread flattened under my weight. I was still on my knees, trying to gather what was left of my dignity when I saw her. Elizabeth. Standing in the yard below, clipboard in hand, phone camera raised. That too-perfect smile stretched across her face like she had practiced it in the mirror 100 times. "Residents of Maple Grove Community," she announced into her phone with fake authority dripping from every syllable. "This is video number 12, documenting the violations of our unauthorized occupant. As you can see, the subject has resorted to breaking and entering into property that doesn't belong to him." That hit me harder than the fall through the window, like I wasn't even a person anymore, just some case study she was documenting for her little audience. I looked out and saw them, neighbors who used to wave at me when I'd visit Mom. Now they stood frozen, watching. Mrs. Patterson peered through her blinds, her face pressed against the glass. Mr. Harris's garden hose lay forgotten on his lawn, water spilling into the soil as he stared at me. And at the end of the street, the young couple with the 2 kids actually stepped onto their porch, like this was a free reality show. That's when I realized I wasn't living in a neighborhood anymore. I was trapped on a stage. And Elizabeth was the director. The keys I had in my pocket had worked fine a week ago. But now my mother's house, the one she left me, was locked from the inside out. Elizabeth had changed the locks and somehow convinced 40 people that I was a fraud, maybe even dangerous. And here's the worst part. She knew things she shouldn't. Personal details about my family that I'd never once spoken in this neighborhood. When she demanded I show my mother's death certificate, it wasn't just an intimidation tactic. It was precise, targeted, like she already knew what I'd say before the words left my mouth. That's what made my blood run cold. She wasn't winging this, she had prepared. The more I thought about it, the more I could see it in her movements. The laminated badge she flashed for just a second, long enough for Mrs. Patterson to squint and assume it was real. The way she paced her sentences, projecting her voice so every neighbor on that street corner could hear. Even the folded notice she pulled from her blazer pocket, creased just enough to look used, but not so much that it lost its shape. It was theater, and I was the villain in her play. When she jingled the keys at my front door, that's when panic truly set in. "Hey," I shouted down the stairs, my voice cracking more than I wanted it to. "You can't just enter my house." But even as the words left my lips, I heard it, the slow, deliberate turn of a key inside the lock. I sprinted down the stairs, heart pounding. I could already picture it, Elizabeth striding inside, still filming, announcing to everyone that I had failed to comply. She would twist every moment into her narrative, and I would be left scrambling to prove the obvious, that this was my house. And that's when I remembered sitting in Anderson and Associates just 1 week earlier, the lawyer's voice flat as he pushed a thick folder toward me across his polished desk. "Mr. White, I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother, Margaret Williams, completed the property transfer 3 months ago, but she specifically requested we delay notification until now." I had stared at those papers in shock. Why delay? Why not tell me immediately? The lawyer's excuse had sounded like smoke, something about giving me time to settle personal matters. At the time, I didn't question it too hard. I just thought, well, Mom had her reasons. But standing at that front door, hearing Elizabeth's key click into place, I couldn't stop the thought racing through my mind. What if Mom had known something? What if she had seen this coming? The door creaked open and Elizabeth stepped inside, not barging, not yelling. Calm, poised. She looked like she owned the place, her voice loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "County Compliance Review," she announced, flashing that laminated badge again. Neighbors craned their necks to watch. To them, it looked official. To me, it looked like my entire life was about to collapse. I held up my legal papers, my hands shaking. "I own this house. Look, it's right here on the deed." But the way she smiled at me, the way her eyes glinted as she spoke, it was like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Then show me the death certificate of Margaret Williams," she said smoothly. I froze. Who asks for something like that? Unless they already know it's the one thing I don't have in my pocket. And when I admitted I didn't, the satisfaction on her face was instant. "Then you cannot prove a legal transfer occurred," she declared, loud enough for the people outside to nod in agreement. "This property must be sealed pending verification." She handed me a folded notice with a fake county seal. It looked convincing enough to anyone at a distance. And then, with a flourish, she pulled a brand new lock mechanism out of her bag, like some twisted magician performing a trick. In less than 10 minutes, Elizabeth had managed to transform me from rightful homeowner to trespasser, all by playing to her audience. But it was when she slipped me her business card, when I turned it over and saw 4 words written in red ink. That's when the ground beneath me gave way. "As she knows the truth." The handwriting wasn't hers. It was my mother's. The same cursive I'd seen on every birthday card, every school lunch note. Margaret Williams's handwriting on Elizabeth's business card. And that's when everything I thought I knew about this nightmare changed. Do you know that feeling when the world tilts under your feet? When you realize everything you thought was settled, safe, ordinary, was actually a trap waiting to snap shut? That was the moment I turned over Elizabeth's business card and saw my mother's handwriting staring back at me. "As she knows the truth." 4 simple words, written in red ink. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the card. That looping script was unmistakable. It was my mother's, but how? She'd been gone for 6 months. I'd buried her, I'd grieved her, or at least I thought I had. I shoved the card in my pocket, my heart pounding like a drum. There was no way I was going to confront Elizabeth about it, not yet. Not with half the neighborhood still watching from their windows like spectators at a Coliseum match. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Jessica. "Dad," her voice crackled through the line, warm but sharp, like she already sensed something was wrong. "Jess, I need your help," I said, my throat tight. "Something's very wrong with this inheritance." 24 years old, sharp as a blade, and a real estate agent downtown. Jessica knew how to read property records better than most lawyers I'd met. If anyone could make sense of the madness Elizabeth was orchestrating, it was her. I told her everything, about the locks, about Elizabeth's fake health inspection, about the 48-hour ultimatum she'd shoved into my hands, and most of all about the handwriting. There was a pause on the line. I could almost see her face, brows furrowed, that little humming sound she made when she was deep in thought. "Dad," she finally said, her voice low but steady. "HOA presidents don't have the authority to seal properties. That's not a thing. Elizabeth is definitely lying about something. Stay put. I'm on my way." 30 minutes later, we were tucked into the corner booth of a coffee shop. She brought her laptop, and her determined energy filled the space like a spotlight cutting through fog. "Okay," she said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's start with the basics, county records." She pulled up the property database, scanned the entries, then frowned. "This says Grandma Margaret was relocated to an assisted living facility 6 months ago." "What? That's not right," I said immediately. "She died at home, heart attack. I have the death certificate." "Show me." I slid the folded paper across the table. She leaned in, examining every number, every stamp. Her frown deepened. "Dad, this certificate number doesn't match the county format," she murmured. "Something off here, let me call." She put her phone on speaker, dialing the county office. "Hi, yes, I need to verify a death certificate number, 2024 MB8847. Name, Margaret Williams." The line clicked and then came the voice. Calm, bureaucratic, devastating. I'm sorry, we have no record of that certificate number. My stomach dropped, my hands went cold. Jessica hung up slowly, her eyes wide as they met mine. Dad, the county has no record of Grandma's death. Either that certificate is completely fake or she never actually died. The words rattled around my head like loose bullets. Never actually died. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as a clerical error. But deep down, something inside me whispered that it was true. My mother was alive. And if she was alive, then Elizabeth's little performance wasn't just about property. It was about silencing something bigger. Jessica was already digging deeper. She called Memory Gardens, the assisted living facility listed in the records. Her knuckles whitened on the phone. No record, none at all, her voice pitched higher. You're sure Margaret Williams transferred 6 months ago? She hung up, shaking her head. They've never even heard of her. Dad, this is bad, really bad. I rubbed my temples, trying to steady myself. Jessica, how would Elizabeth even know to ask me for a death certificate? How could she know so much about Mom? Jessica's eyes narrowed. She started pulling up incorporation documents for Maple Grove HOA. Let's find out who Elizabeth really is. Her fingers tapped, clicked, scrolled, then she froze. Dad, you need to see this. She turned the screen toward me. My mother's name stared back at me in bold type. Margaret Williams, founding president of Maple Grove HOA. And just below it, Elizabeth Jones, secretary. My jaw went slack. Elizabeth hadn't just been some nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. She'd been at my mother's side, trusted, privileged, she'd known everything. But that wasn't the part that made my blood turn to ice. There was a section at the bottom of the document marked, Classified FBI Cooperation Agreement. Signed, dated 3 months ago. Jessica's voice trembled. Dad, Grandma wasn't just a homeowner, she was working with the FBI. The air around us seemed to collapse. The scraping of chairs, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, all of it faded into a hollow buzz in my ears. If my mother had been alive 3 months ago, if she'd signed a cooperation agreement, then this wasn't about me at all. It was about something much larger. I thought back to Elizabeth's staged authority, the way she demanded that death certificate, the way she slipped that business card into my hand with those 4 words written in my mother's hand. As she knows the truth. The truth wasn't just that I owned the house. It was that Elizabeth had been living a double life. And my mother, my supposedly dead mother, had been hunting her. Do you know that moment when a truth is so big it doesn't even fit in your head? Like you've been living in one version of your life, and suddenly someone tears the curtain back and shows you a stage set you never even knew was there. That was me sitting in that coffee shop, staring at my mother's name listed as the founding president of Maple Grove HOA. And right below it, Elizabeth's. My mother and Elizabeth partners once, secretary and president, bound by signatures. And then that line at the bottom of the page. Classified FBI Cooperation Agreement. Signed 3 months ago. I sat back in the booth, my heart slamming in my chest. My mother had been alive 3 months ago. Not only alive, but working with the FBI. Which meant everything I thought I knew about her death, about her absence, about this inheritance was built on lies, or maybe not lies, maybe strategy. Jessica leaned across the table, her voice low, urgent. Dad, we have to go back into the house. If Grandma was working with the FBI, if she was investigating Elizabeth, there's got to be something hidden there. Files, evidence, something she left behind for us to find. For a moment, the idea terrified me. That house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like Elizabeth's stage. Every window was a spotlight, every neighbor an audience member. But Jessica was right. If Mom had left breadcrumbs, they'd be inside. We waited until Elizabeth's car pulled away from the curb later that night. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. Porch lights glowed, but blinds stayed closed. I could almost feel eyes behind them, watching, waiting for me to trip again so they'd have something new to whisper about in their kitchens tomorrow morning. Jessica slipped a key from her pocket. I had a locksmith cut a spare from the old lock, Let's pray she didn't upgrade everything. The metal slid into place with a soft click, and for the first time since Elizabeth's performance at my front door, I stepped inside my mother's house like it belonged to me again. Jessica pulled out her phone, ready to document everything. "Systematic search," she said firmly, her real estate training kicking in. "We treat this like a walkthrough, top to bottom, no assumptions." The living room smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish, the kind of smell that clings to furniture after someone's been gone too long. I ran my fingers across the arm of Mom's old chair. For a moment, the grief hit me fresh. The idea that she might still be alive collided with the years of distance between us, the fights, the silence, the regrets I thought I'd never be able to fix. "Dad," Jessica's voice snapped me back. She was already tugging open drawers, scanning through stacks of envelopes, taking photos of anything that looked remotely unusual. We worked our way through the kitchen, the bedrooms, even the attic. Nothing, just the ordinary clutter of a life. But when we reached the basement, that's when the air shifted. I was moving boxes when I noticed it. The bookshelf along the far wall wasn't flush with the cement. There was a gap, small, subtle, but enough. "Jessica, help me move this." We shoved the shelf aside, dust plumbing into the air, and there it was, a narrow door hidden behind the wall. A door I'd never seen in all the years I'd visited Mom. Jessica's eyes widened. "Dad." The knob turned easily like it had been waiting. We stepped inside, and the world we knew shattered. It wasn't a basement anymore. It was a law office. A mahogany desk, file cabinets lined with labels, a bookshelf stacked with thick legal volumes, on the desk a nameplate. Margaret Williams, Esquire, Property Law Specialist, Elder Fraud Division. I staggered backward. My mother, a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a specialist in elder fraud. Jessica ran her hand along the desk, her voice barely above a whisper. Grandma was investigating. She was building cases. We pulled open the cabinets. Dozens of folders, each one labeled with names, addresses, case numbers, elderly victims, HOA disputes, property seizures, all patterns, all identical. And then one file stopped me cold. Elizabeth Jones. Primary subject. Inside were surveillance photos, notes, testimonies, copies of forged documents. Elizabeth's face stared up at us again and again, linked to 12 elderly victims across 5 neighborhoods. Different names, different aliases, but always the same scheme. Jessica gasped, "Dad, look at this." Behind a stack of files, she found a photo album, not of victims, of me. Pictures from when I was a child, from when I was a teenager, from before I'd changed my name. But the labels didn't say Thomas White. They said Richard Williams. Jessica's voice shook. "Dad, your real name, you changed it." I sank into Mom's desk chair, the weight of 15 years pressing down on me. I ran, Jess. I couldn't handle the pressure, the expectations. I thought if I left, if I became someone else, maybe I could escape the shame of abandoning her. So I changed my name. Jessica looked at me, hurt but soft. "And Elizabeth knew. She knew your real identity. She's been waiting to use it against you." Before I could respond, headlights flashed across the basement window. A car pulling into the driveway, doors slamming. Elizabeth's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the night. "I saw lights in here. Whoever's inside is trespassing on sealed property." Jessica and I froze, heartbeats hammering in sync. We grabbed what we could, the Elizabeth file, the surveillance photos, a handful of documents. And then we scrambled to the basement window, crawling out just as Elizabeth's footsteps echoed above. Across the street, crouched behind my car, we watched her storm into the house with 2 men in suits at her side. And then, clear as day, we heard her voice. "Yes, he found the basement office. The investigation is compromised. We need to accelerate the timeline immediately." Jessica's phone buzzed with notifications. My blood ran cold as I looked at the screen. Elizabeth had posted another community alert. Suspicious intruder identified as Richard Williams, also known as Thomas White. Subject abandoned his dying mother 15 years ago, now attempting property theft. Neighbors were already commenting. Mrs. Patterson, Richard, Margaret mentioned him once, said he broke her heart. Elizabeth, exactly. He's back to steal her property after years of abandonment. Each word was a knife, because it was true, not the way Elizabeth framed it, but true enough to wound. Jessica gripped my arm. Dad, she's not just playing HOA games anymore. She's building a case against you in the court of public opinion. And tomorrow, she's holding an emergency meeting to vote you out permanently. I could barely breathe. Elizabeth had my neighbors, my past, and now even my name twisted in her hands. But Jessica wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Mom's desk calendar. Tomorrow's date circled in red. One word written in my mother's hand. End game. Have you ever woken up with the crushing weight of shame pressing on your chest? That's what I felt the next morning at Jessica's apartment. My name was Thomas White anymore. It wasn't even Richard Williams. It was fraud, betrayer, the man who abandoned his mother. That's the identity Elizabeth had handed me, wrapped in neat little lies that carried just enough truth to pierce me. I couldn't look at my phone without seeing neighbors' comments. Mrs. Patterson's disappointment, Mr. Harris's anger, strangers gossiping as if they knew me better than I knew myself. Elizabeth had stripped me down to my lowest moment and paraded it for the neighborhood, and part of me believed I deserved it. But Jessica wouldn't let me drown in it. She stood at her kitchen counter, spreading out the files we'd pulled from the hidden office like a battlefield map. Dad, forget the shame for now, she said firmly. Look at these documents again. Grandma wasn't just collecting evidence on Elizabeth, she was mapping an entire network. This isn't a neighbor with a clipboard, this is organized crime. I leaned over the files, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. The words hit like body blows. Operation Elder Harvest, multi-state investigation. Case notes, surveillance photos, patterns across Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, elderly residents targeted, isolated, stripped of their homes. Property sold below market, profits laundered. A pattern so cold and systematic it made my stomach twist. Jessica's voice was steady but filled with fire. She preyed on people with no family, or with family she could discredit, like you. I swallowed hard. So Mom wasn't just fighting her own battle, she was protecting others. Jessica nodded. And she knew Elizabeth would come after her property. That's why tomorrow was circled on the calendar. Endgame wasn't just about her, it was about taking down the entire operation. Her phone buzzed, and without hesitation she dialed a number written on one of Margaret's notes. A direct line. Agent Miller, FBI Elder Fraud Task Force. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. Jessica didn't waste time. This is Jessica Williams. My grandmother, Margaret Williams, left us files on Elizabeth Jones and a network called Elder Harvest. We've found her hidden office. We know something big is happening tomorrow. There was a pause, then the question that made my blood freeze. Is this Thomas White, also known as Richard Williams? I swallowed. Yes, that's me. The voice lowered, urgent. Mr. White, listen carefully. Your mother isn't dead. She's been alive this entire time under federal protection, and she's in immediate danger. The room tilted. My knees nearly gave out. Alive? My mother alive? I'd spent 6 months grieving, cursing myself for the years I'd abandoned her. I thought she'd died alone, heartbroken by my absence, but she was alive, hidden, fighting. Jessica gripped my arm as if anchoring me. Her eyes were wide, shining with tears she hadn't let fall yet. Agent Miller continued. Elizabeth suspects Margaret discovered her network. If she realizes your mother is still alive, she'll activate her extraction protocol. That means disappearing forever, with resources, documents, and associates who can erase entire trails in a single night. We can't let that happen. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Why didn't she tell me? Why let me think she was dead? Because you were leverage, Mr. White, Miller said grimly. If Elizabeth knew Margaret had a son, she'd use you to get to her. We had to keep you separated. But Elizabeth has turned her attention on you anyway. That puts both of you in play now. My throat ached. The idea that Mom had watched from a distance while I stumbled, humiliated, broken. That she'd stayed silent because it was safer. It tore me apart. But at the same time, it lit a fire. If she'd risked everything to bring this operation down, then I couldn't let Elizabeth win now. Miller's plan was simple and terrifying. Tomorrow's HOA meeting is the perfect opportunity. Elizabeth expects to humiliate you, claim your property, and seal her victory. Instead, we'll let her confess in front of her neighbors while our agents document everything. At the right moment, we'll move in. But we need you to play your part. You have to let her think she's destroying you. I closed my eyes. Play the broken man. Let her strip me of dignity layer by layer so she'd talk too much, gloat too openly, expose her operation. Jessica squeezed my hand. We can do this, Dad, for Grandma, for the families she was protecting. I nodded, even though my stomach twisted into knots. That night, Miller's team moved us to a safe location. The building looked like an old warehouse from the outside, tucked into an industrial park where nobody asked questions. But inside, screens glowed with surveillance feeds, agents moved with military precision, and the hum of radios filled the air. And then, the moment that shattered me all over again. The door opened, and there she was. Margaret Williams. My mother. Alive. She looked thinner, maybe older than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp. Alive in a way I hadn't let myself imagine. She walked toward me, and the world fell away. Richard Kahn, she said softly, using the Vietnamese endearment she'd called me when I was a boy. Her voice cracked, but her arms were steady when she wrapped them around me. Me missed you every single day. I broke, years of regret, 6 months of grief, all of it spilled out in a sob against her shoulder. Mom, I thought I'd lost you forever, I thought. She pulled back, cupping my face with hands that still felt like home. You were young, you were scared, I pushed too hard, but we have this moment now, that's what matters. Jessica stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Grandma. It was the first time she'd spoken the word as an adult. The two of them embraced, 3 generations bound by a reunion that should never have been possible. Agent Miller cleared his throat, giving us a few moments before pulling us back into the reality of what lay ahead. Mrs. Williams, please explain to your son why this undercover operation was necessary. And so she did. 2 years ago, Elizabeth approached her under the guise of helping elderly residents with community regulations. But Margaret had seen through her charm. She recognized the patterns, the pressure, the subtle intimidation, the falsified documents. And when Elizabeth began to push Margaret directly, urging her to sign property transfers she didn't need, she dug deeper. What she found was staggering, a network of fraud stretching across multiple states, victims who lost everything, families torn apart. So she'd gone to the FBI, and together they had built a plan. Margaret would die, disappear. It was the only way to investigate safely, to lure Elizabeth into overplaying her hand. Every humiliation Elizabeth had inflicted on me had been part of the evidence. My suffering was recorded, documented, proof of her psychological manipulation, proof that could hold up in federal court. Mom's eyes glistened with pain as she said it. I watched you, Richard, every moment. It broke my heart, but it was the only way. Your humiliation was the trap we needed. I shook my head, my throat thick. Mom, you watched me suffer. Her grip on my hand tightened. And I suffered with you, but tonight it ends. Miller laid out the final plan. Tomorrow night, the community center, Elizabeth's grand meeting. Federal agents would be scattered through the crowd, disguised as concerned neighbors. At the moment of her triumph, Margaret would appear on screen, alive, undeniable. The trap would snap shut. But then Miller's radio crackled. His face hardened. All units update. Elizabeth has activated emergency protocols. Multiple vehicles inbound. She suspects federal involvement. The room fell silent. This wasn't just an HOA squabble anymore. It was war. Have you ever walked into a room knowing everyone inside wants to see you fail? That's what it felt like when Jessica and I stepped into the Maple Grove Community Hall that evening. The air was thick with whispers. Neighbors avoided my eyes, but their stares burned holes in me anyway. They'd already read Elizabeth's posts, already decided who I was. The fraud, the trespasser, the son who abandoned his dying mother. And Elizabeth stood at the front of the room, glowing under the fluorescent lights like a queen addressing her court, clipboard in hand, that smug, rehearsed smile plastered across her face. "Residents of Maple Grove," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. "Tonight we address the unlawful actions of one Richard Williams, also known as Thomas White. This man has attempted to seize property that does not belong to him. He has resisted compliance, refused documentation, and endangered our community." Every sentence was a dagger, and I stood there silent, letting her drive them in. Because this was the plan. Jessica squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. Her eyes reminded me, hold, wait, trust the plan. Agent Miller's team was scattered in plain sight. Some sat in the back rows pretending to be neighbors. One leaned casually against the door, his arms crossed like board security. Another adjusted his glasses and scribbled notes like an accountant. To anyone else, they were just residents. To me, they were lifelines. Elizabeth was in her element. She flipped through her papers dramatically, holding up forged documents for everyone to see. "Here we have the falsified death certificate he produced," she declared, waving the paper like evidence in a trial. Gasps rippled through the room. I clenched my jaw, fighting the instinct to shout the truth. Elizabeth wasn't satisfied with papers alone. She moved closer, packing the aisle between chairs, making sure every neighbor saw the confidence in her stride. "He abandoned his mother 15 years ago," she continued, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Poor Margaret, alone, heartbroken, and now this son dares to return, not to honor her memory, but to steal her legacy." The crowd murmured, heads nodding. She had them. She always had them. But Elizabeth didn't know what was waiting. Agent Miller gave a subtle nod from the corner, and Jessica slipped a USB drive into the community hall's projector. My pulse quickened. Elizabeth was still talking when the lights dimmed. The projector hummed to life, and then my mother's face filled the screen. Alive, breathing, clear as day. "Good evening, Maple Grove," Margaret's voice said, steady, unshaken. "It's been a long time since many of you have seen me, and I know my absence has raised questions. Tonight I will answer them." The room froze. A neighbor gasped. Mrs. Patterson clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide. Elizabeth's mask cracked for the first time. A flicker, small but there. Her lips parted in disbelief before snapping shut again. "This is manipulation," she barked, raising her clipboard like a shield. "An edited video." But then Mom spoke directly to her. "Elizabeth Jones, you stood by my side for years. You watched me fight for this community. You were my secretary, my friend, and then you betrayed us all." Elizabeth's hand trembled. Margaret's voice grew stronger. "For 2 years, I worked with federal investigators to track your crimes. I documented your forged documents, your fake inspections, your intimidation of the elderly. Every humiliation you inflicted on my son was recorded as evidence. And tonight, in this room, your network ends." Gasps, whispers, the sound of neighbors shifting in their seats. Doubt was breaking through. Elizabeth tried to rally. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Federal investigators, please, if this were true, where are they now?" Right on cue, the back doors swung open. Men and women in dark jackets filed in, badges glinting under the harsh lights. "FBI," one shouted. "Nobody move." Chaos erupted. Neighbors cried out, some ducking, others clutching purses and bags. Elizabeth's face drained of color, but she didn't crumble. No, she turned predator. She yanked a small device from her pocket, a phone but heavier, thicker. With one swipe, the projector screen flickered and died. Margaret's face disappeared. And in that silence, Elizabeth's voice cut through like a blade. "You have no proof. You have nothing. Without that video, all you have is a bitter old woman's lies." Agents surged forward, but Elizabeth was faster than I'd imagined. She darted toward the side exit, her 2 suited men rising from the front row to block the aisle with sudden, violent precision. The crowd screamed, chairs toppled. Jessica clutched my arm. "Dad, she's running." I knew the agents were closing in, but something deeper burned inside me. I couldn't let Elizabeth slip away. Not after everything she'd taken, not just from me, but from my mother, from the people whose names filled those files. I pushed through the panicked crowd, shoving past chairs, heart hammering. Elizabeth's heels clattered against the concrete as she burst into the night air. The parking lot was chaos, flashing lights from unmarked cars, neighbors scattering like leaves in a storm. I was only 10 steps behind her when she spun, eyes wild, and hissed words that froze me mid-stride. "She told you, didn't she, about Endgame?" I stopped, the word Endgame, my mother's calendar. Elizabeth smirked, even with agents circling her. "She didn't tell you everything. She never tells you everything. You think she's a saint? Ask her about the files she didn't show you. Ask her who she sacrificed." Before I could speak, an agent slammed her against the hood of a car, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. She twisted, fighting like a cornered animal, still shouting. "You'll see, he'll see. Margaret isn't who you think she is." The words echoed as they dragged her away. Neighbors stood in stunned silence. Some looked ashamed, some confused, some still clung to Elizabeth's version. But for me, none of it mattered. Because even in defeat, Elizabeth had planted a seed of doubt. Endgame, files she didn't show me, sacrifices she made. And as my mother's face reappeared on the projector screen, calm and proud, I couldn't shake the chill crawling down my spine. What if Elizabeth was right? Do you know how a single sentence can haunt you more than a lifetime of silence? That's what Elizabeth's last words did to me. "You'll see, he'll see. Margaret isn't who you think she is." I heard them over and over, even as she was shoved into the back of an FBI car, even as the flashing lights disappeared into the night. It was like she'd planted a splinter in my chest, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull it free. Neighbors drifted away from the community hall, their faces pale and tight. Some wouldn't meet my eyes at all. Others gave quick, awkward nods like they weren't sure what to believe. I'd expected relief, vindication, but all I felt was unease. Jessica must have seen it on my face because she touched my arm gently. "Dad, don't let her words poison you. She's just trying to twist things like she always does." Maybe, but deep down I wasn't sure. The agents bundled us into a black SUV and drove us back to the safe house. The ride was quiet except for the low buzz of radios. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows, my thoughts chasing each other in circles. Margaret, my mother, sat beside me, alive, breathing, but she kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her hands folded tightly in her lap. There was so much I wanted to ask, so much I needed to say, and yet the words wouldn't come. When we arrived, Agent Miller guided us to a secure conference room. Files were spread across the table, surveillance photos pinned to corkboards, timelines drawn in red marker. It was like stepping into the heart of the storm. "Elizabeth is in custody," Miller said briskly. "But this operation isn't over. She was just one piece. Endgame is real and it's in motion. We need to know what Margaret knows, now." All eyes turned to my mother. She sat straighter, the weariness in her face hardening into resolve. Endgame was Elizabeth's safety net, a final strike if her network was compromised. She has allies, people who can vanish records, shift assets, erase entire lives with a keystroke, if she sent the signal. Her voice trailed off. Miller leaned forward. "What does that mean for us?" Margaret's eyes flicked to me, then Jessica. For the first time since our reunion, her mask cracked. "It means my family is a target. You were always the leverage, Richard. And if Endgame is triggered, they won't just come for me. They'll come for you." The room chilled. Jessica's hand found mine under the table, her grip fierce. "Grandma, what aren't you telling us? You've been holding something back." Margaret inhaled slowly. "Because it's something no child should ever have to hear about their mother. But maybe Elizabeth was right. You deserve the truth." The room went silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade. "When I first began investigating," she said, her voice low and steady, "I realized this network wasn't just about property theft. It was about control. These people, they target the vulnerable, yes, but they also build influence, judges, clerks, police chiefs, people willing to look the other way, and to get close I had to make choices. Her eyes glistened as she looked at me. I had to sign documents, play their game, pretend to sacrifice people I cared about so they'd trust me. Some of those signatures were real. Some families lost their homes because I needed to keep my cover. The words hit me like a hammer. You let them lose their homes? My voice cracked with disbelief. Mom, people suffered, you sacrificed them. Tears pooled in her eyes. To save dozens more, hundreds more. I told myself the end justified the means, that once the FBI brought them down, the sacrifices would mean something. I couldn't breathe. Elizabeth's taunt echoed in my head. Ask her who she sacrificed. Jessica spoke before I could. Her voice was sharp, trembling. Grandma, that's not just strategy, that's people's lives, families. Did you ever think about what that would do to Dad, to me? Margaret reached across the table, her hand shaking as it touched mine. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting my mission. I pulled back. Her hand hung in the air for a moment before falling to the table. Agent Miller broke the silence. Endgame isn't philosophy, it's logistics. If Elizabeth triggered it, we need to know where and how. Mrs. Williams, you kept files. What's missing? What haven't you shown us? Margaret closed her eyes. There's a flash drive, hidden in the house. It contains the names of every collaborator, judges, police, even federal employees. If Elizabeth's allies recover it first, they can bury the entire investigation. Miller's jaw tightened. Where's the drive? She hesitated, then whispered, under the floorboards of my office, beneath the second drawer of the mahogany desk. Jessica's eyes widened. We were right there, we didn't even see it. Miller stood, barking orders. Agents moved instantly, grabbing gear, prepping vehicles. The room exploded into motion. But I just sat there, numb. My mother was alive, a hero, some would say, but she was also the reason families had lost everything. She signed her name to their ruin, telling herself it was for the greater good. And now, because of that, Endgame was coming for me. Jessica knelt beside me, her eyes fierce. Dad, I know this is hard, but we can't fall apart now. We have to get that drive before they do. Her strength reminded me of Mom's. Her fire reminded me of mine, back when I still believed in standing up for something. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. That night, under the cover of darkness, we returned to the house one more time. The neighborhood was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence of fear, of suspicion. Porch lights glared like watchtowers. I could feel the weight of every unseen gaze. Inside, the basement was colder than before. Dust motes drifted in the thin beam of Jessica's flashlight. I knelt at the desk, pulling out the second drawer, running my fingers along the grooves until I felt it. A faint ridge, a hidden latch. The floorboard lifted, and there it was. A flash drive, small and black, harmless looking. But when I held it in my hand, I swear it felt heavy. Heavy with every lie, every sacrifice, every name it carried. Jessica's breath caught. That's it, that's endgame. Before I could answer, a floorboard creaked above us. We weren't alone. Have you ever felt a house breathe against you? That was how it felt in that basement, crouched by my mother's desk, clutching the flash drive in my hand. Every creak above us was like the house itself exhaling, warning us, reminding us we weren't alone. Jessica's flashlight trembled in her grip. Her whisper was barely a thread of sound. Dad, someone's upstairs. I killed the light with a quick flick, plunging us into thick, suffocating dark. My pulse hammered in my ears. For a moment we just listened. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. The unmistakable drag of boots across hardwood, not the nervous shuffle of a neighbor. No, this was different, professional. Jessica gripped my arm. Her breath was hot and shallow against my sleeve. I tucked the flash drive into my pocket and reached for the only weapon in sight, an old metal lamp from the corner of the basement. Heavy enough to break a bone, light enough to swing fast. My palms were slick with sweat around the handle. The steps grew louder, then silence. And then the basement door creaked open. Light spilled down the stairs. A beam from a tactical flashlight cut through the dark, blinding in its precision. Down here, a voice barked, male hard. Two shadows descended the steps, weapons raised. They weren't police. No badges, no hesitation, mercenaries, Elizabeth's people. I pressed Jessica against the wall, whispering in her ear, "Stay low, don't move." The first man reached the bottom. His face was masked, his grip steady on the pistol in his hand. The second followed, sweeping his light across the room. That's when I moved. The lamp connected with the first man's wrist before he even registered I was there. His gun clattered to the floor and I kicked it away. He cursed, lunging at me, and we slammed into the desk, papers scattering like snow. Jessica screamed as the second man raised his weapon. Instinct took over. I grabbed the first man by the collar, yanked him into the line of fire. The shot exploded, deafening in the basement. The bullet tore through his shoulder, his scream filling the room. I shoved him into the second man, buying a split second. "Jess, run." She bolted toward the basement window, scrambling onto the desk, kicking at the glass with everything she had. It cracked once, twice, then shattered outward. The second man was on me, his fist smashing across my jaw. My vision went white. Pain ripped through my skull. But I clung to him, grappling, twisting, desperate to keep his gun pointed anywhere but Jessica. She was halfway through the window when another figure appeared outside, an agent sprinting across the yard, gun drawn. "FBI, drop it." The second mercenary froze. For a moment everything stopped, the gun between us, my chest heaving. Jessica's legs kicking as the agent pulled her through the window to safety. And then the man smiled. Not fear, not panic, a smile. He leaned close enough for me to smell the copper of his breath. "It doesn't matter," he whispered. "She already triggered it." Triggered what? Before I could ask, a flash of light burst through the window. The agent outside tackled Jessica to the ground, dragging her away. And then gunfire, chaos. The mercenary twisted free, bolting up the stairs with inhuman speed. The wounded one followed, clutching his shoulder, leaving a trail of blood. By the time I scrambled after them, the house was empty, silent. But their words echoed in the hollow dark. She already triggered it. I stumbled outside, blinking against the sweep of red and blue lights. More FBI vehicles had swarmed the street, neighbors clustered in small, horrified groups at the edges of their lawns. Jessica ran to me, throwing her arms around my neck. Her body shook against mine, but her voice was steady. "Dad, we still have the drive, we still have it." I pulled it from my pocket, holding it tight in my palm. The little piece of plastic felt like the heaviest thing I'd ever carried. Agents rushed us back into the SUV, sirens wailing as we tore away from the neighborhood. Inside, Miller's face was carved from stone. "They wanted the drive," he said. "That confirms it. Endgame isn't just a failsafe, it's a kill switch. That drive has the identities of collaborators. If it's exposed, they lose everything. If they get it back, they bury the truth forever." Margaret was waiting when we arrived at the safe house. Her eyes darted to the bruises on my jaw, the blood on my sleeve. For the first time, I saw fear in her, not for herself, for me. "You weren't supposed to be in this deep," she whispered. "I wanted you out of this. I wanted you safe." I slammed the flash drive onto the table, my anger finally boiling over. "Safe? You faked your death, Mom. You let me mourn you. You let me believe I abandoned you twice. And for what? So you could play games with criminals." Her lips trembled. "Richard, I had to. If you knew, if anyone knew, it would have compromised everything." Jessica cut in, her voice sharp as glass. "Compromised what, Grandma? How many families? How many lives? You say it's for the greater good, but what about the people who never got their homes back? What about the people who died before the FBI could swoop in?" Margaret's eyes glistened with tears she couldn't hide anymore. "Every night I see their faces. Don't you think I know what I've done? But if I stopped, if I broke cover, Elizabeth's network would still be out there, stronger, untouchable." I stared at her, the woman I'd called Mom, the woman I thought I'd lost forever. Alive, a hero to some, a monster to others. And then Miller connected the drive to a secure laptop. Lines of data filled the screen. Names, addresses, account numbers. Jessica leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. Dad, look at this. Dozens of names scrolled past. Judges, council members, law enforcement, even federal employees, and at the top of the list, Elizabeth Jones. And just below her, Margaret Williams. I felt the air leave my lungs. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. Grandma, your name is on the list. Margaret's face was pale as stone. And suddenly, Elizabeth's taunt made perfect sense. Ask her who she sacrificed. She hadn't just been investigating the network. She had been part of it. Do you know what betrayal feels like when it comes from the one person you swore could never hurt you? It isn't loud. It isn't fire or rage. It's a quiet breaking inside your chest, like glass cracking beneath the weight of something too heavy. That's what I felt when I saw my mother's name on that list. Margaret Williams. Listed as a collaborator. My breath caught in my throat. Jessica whispered it before I could. Grandma, you were one of them. Mom's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Then, softly, yes, at the beginning. The room went still. Even the agents behind us stopped moving. Margaret's voice was low, trembling. I didn't set out to be part of them. But years ago, when Elizabeth built this network, I signed things I shouldn't have. At first, it was small, routine HOA filings, harmless on the surface. Then came pressure, more documents. I thought I was helping neighbors. By the time I realized what it really was, I was already on the inside. I stared at her, anger and grief twisting together until I couldn't tell them apart. So you were never just investigating, you were cleaning your own conscience. She flinched but didn't deny it. I stayed close to Elizabeth because I had no choice. And when the FBI approached me, I made a decision. Either expose myself and risk prison, or keep playing the role until I could help dismantle the entire machine. Jessica shook her head, tears streaking her face. You let him grieve you, you let me believe you were gone, all to protect yourself. No, Mom said sharply, her voice breaking. I did it to protect you both. If Elizabeth knew I still had family, if she knew about Richard, you would have been targets. My death was the only shield I had to give you. Agent Miller's jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. Mrs. Williams, your name being on this list complicates things. You may have been cooperating, but legally. Legally, I'm guilty, she finished for him. I know. Silence. The flash drive hummed in the laptop, scrolling through the names. The weight of it pressed on all of us. Finally, I spoke, my voice rough. So what now? Do we just hand this over and let the system bury her along with Elizabeth? Miller's eyes flicked to me. The system doesn't bury, it prosecutes. But I saw the doubt in his face. He knew as well as I did, half the names on that drive were the system. Judges, officials, people who could twist this, delay it, hide it. Mom looked at me then, her eyes raw and wet. Richard, I can't ask you to forgive me. I only ask that you remember why I stayed. Why I risked everything. It wasn't for power, it wasn't for them. It was for the chance, just the chance, to make sure no other family would suffer what ours did. Jessica's voice cracked. But we suffered, Grandma, we're still suffering. The air was thick with grief and anger, but under it all was something harder, choice. We had the drive, the evidence, the truth, messy, complicated, damning. Miller broke the silence. We move tonight. The drive gets copied and disseminated across federal servers. Every collaborator will be flagged. But understand this, if Margaret's name is on it, her fate will be the same as the rest. Mom didn't flinch, so be it. For a long moment, I just looked at her. The woman I thought I'd buried. The woman who'd raised me, lied to me, abandoned me, saved me, betrayed me, all in one lifetime. And then slowly I nodded. Then let's finish it. The next hours blurred into motion. Agents encrypted the files, sent copies across secure channels. Arrest teams mobilized, names were flagged, warrants prepared. But Margaret didn't join the frenzy. She sat quietly, her hands folded, her gaze far away, like she'd already accepted the ending waiting for her. By dawn, news had broken. Local headlines first, then national. Massive elder fraud network exposed. Dozens of officials implicated. Elizabeth's photo splashed across every screen, her smirk finally stripped bare. And buried in the text, one more name, Margaret Williams. My mother. Neighbors in Maple Grove gathered again, this time outside the community hall. Not whispering, not gawking, just silent. Some shook their heads, some cried, some looked at me with something like pity. Jessica stood at my side, her arm linked with mine, her chin lifted high. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted. Mr. White, do you have any comment on your mother's involvement? I paused, the flash of cameras burning my eyes. She made mistakes, I said quietly. But she also made sure the truth couldn't stay buried. Sometimes heroes aren't clean, sometimes they're broken, but what matters is what they leave behind. My voice cracked, but I didn't care, and my mother left us the truth. That night back at Jessica's apartment, I sat alone on the balcony. The city lights flickered below, distant and cold. The door slid open, and Jessica joined me, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. She set one down beside me. She might go to prison, Jessica said softly. I nodded, she probably will. But Dad, she also saved us. And maybe this was the only way she knew how. I stared into the steam rising from the cup. For the first time in weeks, the weight in my chest felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. Because Elizabeth had lost. The network had fallen. And even if the truth about my mother was complicated, painful, even ugly, at least it was truth. And sometimes, dignity doesn't come from pride or perfection. Sometimes, dignity comes from finally facing the mess head-on. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.